good morning, good afternoon. A very warm welcome from wherever you are joining us to this first session after the plenary of the Business and Human Rights in Asia Pacific this year. And I feel we have a very exciting topic we're going to be talking about today, the power of procurement, the power of women's entrepreneurship to create more inclusive value chains. And I'm really thrilled that we are going to have a really exciting panel, which you can see here on the screen. But before I introduce you to this really powerful woman, I'm going to start turning it over to you actually in the room. And I'm going to combine this a little bit with some housekeeping for today. So first of all, I'm going to be moderating this session today. My name is Katja Feiwald, and I'm working at UN Women in our regional office here in Bangkok and leading a very exciting program which is called We Empower Asia. And We Empower Asia is also hosting this session today. It's a joint program together with the European Union, and I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about this in a second. But we would love to know who is joining us today and from where you are joining us. So this is a new platform that we are all using, and we're very excited about it. So I'm going to share you a little bit the technology about it. So there is on your right side a task icon. And this is a way where we can show you polls or word clouds. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. And we're going to be putting 2 questions in that task window for the moment. And the first question is going to be, we would love to know from where you're joining us. And the second question is really looking at from what kind of organization or type of sector you are joining at, business, CSOs, governments, etc. So to just allow us to get a little bit of a flavor who is in the room. Just for everyone's knowledge, this session is also broadcasted on YouTube, so we will have different audiences joining us, not only in that live stream here. We also know that we have many different nationalities joining us, so we do have also a translation function. If you go to the bottom of the screen, if you are at the live stream at the Business and Human Rights Forum platform, there is a floor icon, so a window which says floor. And you have a drop-down window where you can choose any language that you want to have the session translated into. Also, we do have a Q&A window. So again, at the right side, you will have a chat function which says Q&A. We will be collecting and really we encourage sharing questions which we will collect till the end and during the panel, and hope we're going to be addressing as many as possible. I'm just looking at my technical colleagues if we have already people answering the poll for the moment, or if we want to keep that while we are waiting. Just everyone to know, I think we have been having a really great registration for the whole forum, and usually the audiences that are joining us here are mainly from the Asia and Pacific, from the different countries here, but we do have also guest speakers and participants from other regions across the world. And the forum itself, as the name says, is the Business and Human Rights Forum. And we expect a lot of businesses joining us today, but we do have also a quite broad registration base from other stakeholders, including our valuable partners, CSOs, governments, academia, etc. Do we have an answer already from the audience, or should we just get started and do a... there we see. So yeah, Southeast Asia seems to be quite prominent in the session. That's what we had also last year. I see also some representatives from Europe and North America, not to our surprise, considering that a lot of the value chains and the topic procurement probably touches many of them as well. And do we also know from what sectors people are joining us? Okay, interesting. Lots of civil society as well. And I guess a lot of the others, as we've seen in the first session already, are joining us also through our YouTube streaming or Facebook Live. Okay, let's kick this off for a good and exciting conversation about gender-responsive procurement, a quite technical term. And what we would love to do is just kind of getting a little bit of an idea from the audience. Please do share us what comes to mind when we speak about gender-responsive procurement, what words, ideas, concepts, approaches, what comes top of your mind hearing about gender-responsive procurement, which I can share already a little bit, is in our region here less developed than in some of the other regions across the world, and we will be hearing a little bit more about this in a second. But just to kind of feel a little bit the pulse in the room, in the audience, what thoughts you have about gender-responsive procurement. And no worries if people coming just new to this. We will be discussing a lot, and I'm sure your knowledge will be also getting new perspective, women-owned businesses, equity, support. And we will be hearing about women-owned businesses today. We have an exciting founder with us of a really exciting business who we'll be hearing from. Diversity, yes, we're going to be speaking about supplier diversity. I'm really excited to have some large companies also represented today. I'm just going to share, it's not only about business, it's going to be also about procurement and the public sector. We will be having also great speakers from the Indonesian government with us today. I think that's going to probably fill up still a little bit. I'm a bit mindful of time, and I guess you are probably all more interested in listening more and hearing more what we have to say and really see what gender-responsive procurement looks like in our region for the moment. As I said, just quickly a little bit of context why we are organizing this session on behalf of We Empower Asia, because our program, as I said before, is funded by the European Union and has a very strong objectives to increase women's economic participation across the value chains, these trade chains between Asia and Europe, or Europe and Asia. And obviously that calls out for a lot of procurement discussions. There's a lot of buying ongoing, selling and buying in these large chains. And what I would like to do is to really give us a perspective on how also gender-responsive procurement does fit largely in the business and human rights agenda, or particularly also in the sustainable development agenda. And I think everyone who is interested in gender equality and everyone who is interested in the sustainable development goals know that SDG 5 gender equality is a cross-cutting SDG that we need to achieve the full agenda at 2030. However, I just want to also point out that gender-responsive procurement is not only a discussion about gender equality. It has huge impact also on achieving our decent work agenda, SDG 8 and also SDG 12 on sustainable consumption. So gender-responsive procurement is an important topic in the wider SDG agenda. We don't want to bother today, and sorry for the slides, it's a little bit delayed, Ms. Asper. What I don't want to get into today is a large discussion about definitions. And this is one of the things that we see and research for the moment in the region, that there are different definitions of gender-responsive procurement. And for the sake of today's session, we're going to really follow the definition on gender-responsive procurement is the sustainable selection of services and goods that considers the impact on gender equality and women's empowerment. So that's the wider frame on gender-responsive procurement. And we're going to be looking into sourcing from women-owned enterprises on the one hand, which is a big part of gender-responsive procurement. But we're also going to be speaking about gender-responsive suppliers, supplier diversity, which is really sourcing from any kind of enterprise and looking how they embrace gender equality into their operations. So with no further ado, and I think definitions are boring but are important, and I'm really having the pleasure now to introduce a much more exciting speaker from a very exciting organization who has been really driving the agenda on gender responsive procurement, not only in Asia Pacific, but globally. So I'm really pleased to introduce the Regional Director for Reconnect, Minnie Venkatachalam. Minnie, we're really thrilled to have you with us. You're spearheading such an important agenda, and I'll just hand it over to you and enlighten us a little bit on where do we stand in Asia Pacific when it comes to gender responsive procurement. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Katya, and welcome everybody. So my name is Minnie, and I'm the Regional Director for We Connect International, which is a global nonprofit that works on supplier diversity and focuses on women-owned businesses. If I could go to the next slide, please. So why do we focus on women and why women? So all the research has shown that women are the the next emerging economy. They are the 40% of the world's businesses are women owned. Women as consumers make 85% of consumer purchasing decisions and are the target audience for most large organizations, as well as the fact that organizations that have at least one female founder perform 63% better than companies with only male founders and are therefore stronger economically. They make better suppliers for larger corporations. Next slide, please. But let's go right down to Asia. Our research in Asia has shown that if we reach an equal number of women-owned businesses in Singapore, in just Singapore, that can add up to 90 billion to the economy, which is roughly 20% of GDP. Businesses owned by women entrepreneurs in India are likely to witness a 90% growth in the next 5 years and are therefore definitely the emerging market, as well as the e-commerce market could grow up to 280 billion between 2025 and 2030 just by increasing the number of female vendors on online platforms. Therefore, helping women-owned businesses grow, building that economy is beneficial to everyone, irrespective of which sector you come from. Let's go to the next slide, please. Unfortunately, even today, less than 1% of large corporate and government spend worldwide goes to women-owned businesses. And that's kind of crazy in 2021, when we all know and understand the value of investing in women and in the benefits of equality. Luckily, we are seeing a trend where more corporations are now seeing the value in buying from women-owned businesses. Next slide, please. So why do corporations do this? It's simple. A corporation that actually invests in a diverse supply chain spends 20% less on their procurement operations, but reaps 125% return on whatever they invested. At the same time, for every women-owned business that they give a contract to, that business grows 250%. And those businesses then go on to invest in their communities, which including, hiring more people from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing flexible working both to men and women, and thereby impacting their communities. So there is quite a large, impact, but it is ultimately just good business because these businesses, it's not CSR, it's not let's feel sorry for women-owned businesses. They are really good at what you do. And investing in buying from women-owned businesses, being more inclusive in your supply chain, ensures that you have the most effective, the most agile, the most innovative supplier, and the most competitive for your supply chain, and therefore that you are getting value from your supply chain. You are mirroring your consumer database because we know that women make the majority of consumer purchasing decisions. As well as you are building your brand in the community by investing in women-owned businesses. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So, we've worked with a lot of corporations across Asia Pacific, and they are keen to do this, but they have certain criterion that they have shown that would be more beneficial to encourage them to source more from women-owned businesses. The first is government incentives and a commitment from governments to, encourage themselves, both in public procurement as well as, large corporations, to buy more from women-owned businesses. At this point in ASEAN, for example, we do not have any governments that have made that commitment. They need guidance on identification on how to set a baseline, how to set targets, and how to achieve them. Because currently that is a gap. They do not understand how to go about that and feel that there aren't enough databases out there that provide them with a structured definition of, women-owned and a database of women-owned suppliers in all categories that they can find. They also feel that women-owned suppliers tend to be less financially stable, and this is indicated by the suppliers themselves that they find challenges in accessing financial services. So providing equal access to financial services for women-owned businesses, which is, credit, investment, etc., will help more women-owned businesses be sustainable suppliers to corporations across Asia Pacific. An important part of that is also ensuring that they have leadership from their, buy-in from their leadership, as well as their grant staff, and that they understand the value of buying from women-owned businesses. And that feeds into, of course, training for buyers on the business case of buying from women-owned businesses, and then the processes that can help simplify it, because many corporations in this region feel that the reason why they can't do it is because it will complicate their sourcing. It will cause them to have to develop new strategies or new procurement processes, which can be very intensive for them, and therefore they aren't very sure if they want to invest in this. But realistically, it is just about being more inclusive in their supply chains, and therefore training on what that means will help more corporations source. And the last thing is that a lot of corporations and women-owned businesses have identified the fact that they cannot clearly articulate the competitive advantage. So more training for the women-owned businesses in this space to understand those key requirements while accessing value chains, to understand what kind of processes they need to have in place to be a concrete supplier to a larger organization is needed. And that's some of the things that organizations here, like ADB, UN Women, We Connect National, are working on at this point. Like I said, We Connect National is very privileged to have started this conversation with many large corporations. Amy, could I ask for the next slide, please? So these are just a few of the organizations worldwide that have started conversations around sourcing from women-owned businesses. They have very developed conversations in the US, in Europe, and to some extent even in South Africa. But Asia is the next frontier, and they are slowly beginning their conversations in this region. And that's why we need to have that commitment, both at the government level and within local leadership, to buy more from women-owned businesses and for them to understand the business case for it. Next slide, please. One of the clear things, thank you, Amy. One of the clear things that a lot of corporations have identified as a need to show that women-owned businesses are indeed women-owned is some sort of public identification. This women-owned logo was created many years ago in partnership with Walmart, who saw that when this logo was used, customers were 65% more likely to buy from women-owned businesses because they wanted to support that, because they felt that connection. And so this is the logo that certified women-owned businesses around the world use to identify themselves as women-owned and to highlight themselves to larger organizations like the many who are on this call today. Next slide, please. These are just a few of the amazing women-owned businesses that we know of in Asia Pacific. Gimli Global is one of the world's largest fabric producers. They supply to all of the large organizations, and it's headed by one woman, Madam Estina, who's in this photo, who founded this, many, many years ago with just 12 sewing machines and has grown this into a large corporation across Asia Pacific with factories in every country that provide local employment in all of the countries they source from, but also supply to. Akanksha from PM Relocations is one of the first women to actually head a relocations company that she owns herself. And she is one of the key motivators in actually enabling access to essential supplies in India at this moment. She's entirely pro bono. They are ensuring that all essential supplies are accessible to everybody across India. Organization Solutions has been around for 21 years. They're based in Singapore, and they have been helping large corporations mentor and grow their staff for 21 years. They are extremely well renowned and have just launched a wonderful product that makes it even easier for corporations to work with them. So these women-owned businesses, they didn't start these businesses because, out of necessity. They started because they know that they are really good at what they do, and they wanted to grow businesses and work with large corporations, work with everyone around the world to bring that value. And that is why you need to invest in women-owned businesses, especially in Asia Pacific, because we have a very large, very qualified women-owned businesses who are just waiting to work with large organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minnie, for giving us that perspective, and then also that wide perspective, not only looking at sourcing from companies, but really the wider ecosystem perspective, also to include governments and the joint responsibility of multiple stakeholders. And I think it will be great to take some of your findings and learnings that you have shared, and some of the facts and figures, to really take them forward to our discussion with what I said before, a really exciting panel that we do have today. And it's actually quite unusual, I think, if we speak with representatives of procurement departments and supply chain departments, that we do have such a rich representation of women. Normally that conversation does look a little bit less gender balanced in the other direction. So but I'm really grateful to have these women from the different sectors here today to shine a little bit light on what they are currently doing. How can we really move that needle to shift from the 1% unbelievable number of procurement spent towards women-owned businesses? Let me just quickly introduce the panel as a whole, and then I will go to each speaker individually and just share and get to know them a little bit better and what their organizations are doing. So you have heard from many already, but we do have also great representation with us today from the Indonesian government. A very warm welcome, Ibu Anita Caroline, who is with the Indonesian government and particularly a policy analyst in the Indonesia National Board for Public Procurement. We do have a dear colleague, Kekono Vaska from the Asian Development Bank from ADB, who will be shining a light on what ADB is doing in the space of gender responsive procurement. I'm extremely excited that we do have Ganaki Rani with us, who is an entrepreneur and founder herself in the fashion industry, and will have to share a really interesting perspective of her own business and the development of that business, and see what of the challenges that Minnie mentioned are really true, and what have you seen in your own career. And the panel would not be complete if we would not be also looking at large multinational corporations. And I'm thrilled to have Nusra Tanke with us today, who is the Regional Procurement Director for Unilever, and will be sharing a little bit more about Unilever's new exciting commitments towards gender responsive procurement. But before we do this, as I said before, we really do want to see your engagement, at least for the ones that are in the streaming room and not at YouTube, the ones that really can use the Q&A and the tasks function, as I explained in the beginning. We're going to open up a word cloud throughout the whole panel, where we would like to ask you a bit more, what do you feel needs to be done to move the needle from 1% current gender responsive procurement spend to really accelerate this? And I'm sure we will be hearing an answer to that question from some of our panelists throughout, but please feel free and add this into the chat. We're going to come back to this at the end of the session and really want to use this for a joint Q&A and discussion around what actually are the recommendations that we should be taking forward. And with this, I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to start our conversation with Ibu Anita. Thanks for being here with us from Indonesia. Ibu Anita, we have heard from Minnie, who has shared a little bit more with us about the opportunities that government has to also advance gender responsive procurement in a twofold way. On the one hand, as a procurement organization themselves, government is procuring lots of services and products in different sectors. But on the other side, also does have the opportunity as an institution to provide incentives for more procurement spent towards women-owned businesses. I would love to just ask you and just come with a very simple question. If you could share us a little bit what the Indonesian government is actually doing for the moment on really from who are you procuring and what kind of role does gender play when you make these procurement decisions? Over to you, Ibu.
Okay, thank you, Katja. Hello, everyone. I'm Anita from National Public Procurement Agency, Republic of Indonesia. And Indonesia, the National Public Procurement Agency called Lembaga Kebijakan Pengadaan Barang Jasa Indonesia. I would like first of all, I want to inform you about Indonesia government procurement. The scope of Indonesia government procurement according to the Presidential Decree number 16 2018. The executing institution are ministry, governmental agency, and sub-central or local government. And the government procurement source of financing are from state budget, sub budget or sub-central budget, domestic loan or grants, and offshore loan or grants. And we classify of goods and services in government procurement in Indonesia into 4 types. They are goods, any object either tangible or intangible, movable or immovable, which can be traded, used, or utilized by the user. And the second, construction works, part or whole of activities which include construction, operation, maintenance, demolition, and reconstruction of a building. And the third, consultation service, professional services, which require particular expertise in various fields of science that prioritize the thinking power. And the last, it is other services, non-consultancy services or service that require equipment, especially methodologies and or skill in management system that is widely known in the business world to complete a work. The procurement profile, the Indonesian government procurement profile, it is increasing by the time. In 2020, the government spending, it is about 153.4 billion US dollar. And for the procurement spending, it's about 47.8 from the government spending. The amount is 73.3 billion US dollar. And this number is getting increased every year, and this is the significant number. In Indonesian government procurement, we have seven principles that we have to comply. The first one, efficient, effective, transparent, open, competitive, fair, and accountable. And we also have the purpose that which is stated in our regulation. They are having the proper good services for every penny spent, called value for money, by one, improving the use of domestic product. 2, increasing the participation of small medium enterprise. 3, enhancing the role of national business actor. 4, supporting the implementation of research and utilization of goods services resulting from research. 5, supporting sustainable procurement. 6, to encourage economic equality. And 6, improving the participation of creative industry. After that, we also have the ethic in government procurement, that we have to uh, follow the ethic that we rule. There are order and responsibility. Second, professional, independent, and confidential. The third, avoiding unfair competition. The fourth, compliance and accountable to contract. Fifth, according a conflict of interest. Six, avoiding overspending. Seven, avoiding misuse of authority. And eight, no gratification. About the vendors that we work in Indonesia government procurement, there are Indonesia procurement divide vendor type based on the amount of procurement package allocation. There are two types of vendor in government procurement. The first one is small, which can work on government procurement package with the budget selling up to 15 billion rupiah. And for the non-small, which can work on government procurement package with the budget selling above 15 billion rupiah. It is the huge number for the small also. And then in Indonesia procurement system, there are several category of vendors. Namely, there are the biggest category is from wholesale and retail, vehicle reparation and maintenance, and then construction, and then rental service, lease without option right, employment and other business support, and then agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and then yes.
Ibu
Yeah.
Anita, may I just interrupt you in
Yeah.
in the spirit of time?
Yeah.
Would you be able to share us a little bit, kind of in what of these areas? I mean, it's great to see that these values and really kind of looking at SMEs, where we know many of them are women. What kind of role does gender play in making decisions to buy from these different kind of sectors and entities that you have shared? What role does gender play for the Indonesian government in these decisions?
Okay, thank you, Katja. Actually, in terms of regulation, there is no specific provision regarding gender-responsive procurement in Indonesia, as it is commonly used in procurement practice. Conduct of procurement highlight two basic principles as I mentioned before. In Indonesia, we have set policy for SME and national industry in government procurement, where we believe that those also applied in other countries. Nevertheless, as far as we concern, gender-responsive procurement practice are something new that we need to understand further. And we also plan these are what we try to do in order to pick low-hanging fruits for benefit of women on business in government procurement scheme. The first, we organize special batch to disseminate government procurement such as regulation, system information, procurement procedure, and etc. in vendor capacity building program, which also an opportunity to scale up participation of women and own business in government procurement. Secondly, we plan to identify of women-owned business and government procurement by updating vendor fields in e-procurement system and vendor directory application. Thirdly, we propose to conduct government procurement training specially for women-owned business in several batches in every year to LKPP or in PPA Education and Training Center. And the last, we seek to collaborate with Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection and the Ministry of Cooperative and Small and Medium Enterprises to make special program in increasing the capacity of women-owned business to participate in the government procurement. I think that's all, Katja. I return to you.
Thank you so much, Ibu, Anita, and I think that gives us a really good sort of view. And I think the one thing you mentioned, there are no policy provisions for the moment, but on the other side, I think the government is taking these practical steps around capacity building, for example. Just want to share, we've recently done a research, which is going to be launched tomorrow, actually, on reviewing different kind of policies when it comes to women's economic empowerment across value chains. And one of the findings that we have across ASEAN Asian geographies, there are actually no governments that have gender responsive procurement policies in place. So that's what our landscaping found. So there is definitely a huge opportunity to advance this. But I'm pleased to see also that the practical action on the ground with particularly capacitating SMEs and women-owned businesses is something where I know Indonesia is really leading on. And I know our next panelist, Kiko from the Asian Development Bank, has been involved very much into that work in Indonesia. Keiko, a very warm welcome for us to join into the conversation. And I know you are personally also very passionate about gender responsive procurement. Would you want to share with us a little bit, maybe just for context setting, in what role does ADB play, or what's the role of a development bank, just for the context, but then really very practical sharing how your work looks with the Indonesian government for the moment to start us off with. Over to you, Keiko.
Thank you, Katja, and thank you also for the invitation to take part in this panel. It's already been very interesting and fascinating to listen from Indonesia and from my colleague in WeConnect, and that finding that you just announced, that there are no governments in the ASEAN region with a gender responsive procurement policy. It's disappointing, but at the same time, you have to see the silver lining. This is a great opportunity for development partners such as UN Women and ADB to push and to work with governments to do this, because we all see the importance. So in Indonesia, we've had a great track record in supporting the government over the last decade or so on women's financial inclusion, women's economic empowerment, which are kind of core to ADB's mandate as one of our operational priorities. And so very recently, last year, we supported through a JP Morgan grant in Indonesia the establishment of the first the first in the world to have a national financial inclusion strategy for women in Indonesia. And we see this as a very kind of pioneering and landmark document, which looks at kind of a full spectrum of women's financial inclusion. So looking at kind of the skills development, but also looking at women-owned businesses and also incorporating a focus on gender-responsive procurement, because we understand that from skills to actually access to markets, there's a whole range of different activities, investments, policies, and regulations that need to be in place to be able to support women and to even that very uneven playing field. One key achievement that we've already done in Indonesia last year was actually the adoption of the first national definition of women-owned business. So up to now, we don't know, just like in many other ASEAN countries and other countries in the Asia Pacific, we actually don't know how many women-owned SMEs there are, because we don't have a definition. And therefore, if you don't have a definition, and you were saying, Katja, this is boring, it's not boring. It's a fundamental foundation for being able to do our work. And so to be able to put something on a policy radar. So we are looking forward to continuing that work in Indonesia. We also look at issues such as consumer protection, we're also investing in kind of the fintech sector, looking at how through the private sector as well as the public sector, we can encourage more women MSMEs to enter this kind of very traditionally male-dominated sector. So looking for different opportunities there, and also exploring ways to really build on some of the activities that you mentioned on gender-responsive procurement already, or on procurement, and seeing how we can ensure that gender is part of that. And I'm looking forward to working further with the government of Indonesia on this. And to your point, Katja, about why would someone like ADB be interested in this? So we are very interested in women's entrepreneurship in general, women's entrepreneurship also. And for us, gender-responsive procurement, we're at the beginning of that journey, but we see great potential, because procurement is really about access to markets. We have spent a lot of time over recent decades building up women's skills, women's business skills, financial literacy skills. We work very closely with financial institutions, whether that's in supply chain, finance, trade finance, or even private equity, working with different partners to make sure that they are producing gender responsive products and services so that they can outreach to women-owned businesses and to other female clients. So that's really important. But that whole question about the market, so we train women And then what happens? So unfortunately, if we don't open up markets for them, and sometimes very kind of affirmative targets, such as gender responsive procurement, allows us to, as you said at the beginning, Katja, to move the cursor forward. So for us, gender responsive procurement is the new frontier for women's entrepreneurship, and we see great potential in being able to help women's businesses not just to start up, but to actually thrive and to scale up.
Great, thank you, Keiko. And I love these panels because I scribbled down also really kind of interesting findings for us. I really like the kind of procurement equals access to markets. I think that nails it actually really. And also what I think I would like to kind of dig a little bit deeper in is you've very nicely made this link also to financial inclusion, because it's not only like access to market by buying and selling, but really providing this enabling environment. And we do see there is a strong finance gap, particularly for women SMEs. We call this always the missing middle, actually, for really kind of, there's a lot of micro entrepreneurs that we see in the region, but there's that missing middle there. But speaking about finance and ADB being a development bank, you're providing loans. And I know you have been really kind of championing good practices in terms of how to combine provision of loans to private or public institution, but with a gender lens. Could you kind of give us a little bit a more meat on the bone how that works to put a gender lens into these investments?
Thanks, Katja. So ADB works very closely with gender targets. So that's both in the public and private sector. So when we lend to a financial institution, either in the public or private sector, we see where are the entry points for gender. So if we're doing SME development, we say, okay, so much funding we are lending. How much of that is going to go to women-owned businesses? We look for baselines and targets. So we do analysis, working with those clients, or looking at national level kind of definitions and data. So that data aspect is really important to have a very targeted approach. And we see, okay, so let's say in a certain country, I'll say Sri Lanka, there's 14% of SMEs are owned by women. We try to kind of push the needle a bit and say, let's try to go for 20%. Okay, let's go a little bit above the national average. Might not seem high for many of the kind of ASEAN countries, but for South Asia becomes a bit more ambitious. And then we try to provide technical assistance to those financial institutions and other types of incentives to give them the capacity to outreach to those women, female clients. At the same time, we work on targets and saying, okay, so we need to also got to make sure that the supply is there. So because this is not about market distortions, this is about a business case, right? So there are many eligible, and I think Minnie nailed it at the beginning too, there are great female businesses there. We need to give them, some need a little bit more help in terms of skills development. So we do that also through our financial institutions, but we also try to find ways to link financial institutions with the banks themselves, and so having that kind of opportunity to then access finance. But again, this is very much kind of market rules. So the women's businesses that access that finance, it's because they are eligible for it. They meet the criteria because we can't distort markets. So that's how we work as a development bank. So we try to create that enabling environment. At the same time, we also work very closely with governments to look at policies. So in Vietnam, we're working with the government there, with the central bank, looking at a white policy for women SMEs. They have a new SME policy that does prioritize women-owned businesses, but we need to kind of flesh that out. What does that look like? What are the targets that are needed? Where are the regulation gaps? So it's kind of working across an ecosystem, and I think that's what's really important for women's businesses, that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to do this multi-pronged because there are different stakeholders here involved. In Indonesia, for example, they've adopted a definition of women-owned businesses, but we need to roll that out now. So many banks, they don't collect the data on female or male clients. And many will tell you, why do we need to know that? We only need to know about the kind of, the bottom line, the business kind of details. So it's working with them to update their MIS systems, to be able to collect that kind of data, and that kind of then starts telling you about the very important SME financing gap. I think in Indonesia it's about 22 billion for women, so it's huge. And I think the Asia Pacific has the largest SME financing gap for women in the world. So there's huge unmet need for SME financing, and so we try to bridge that through these different targets. So that's what motivates us internally, as well as through working with our clients and partners.
Thank you very much, Keiko, and a big case to be made for that, considering that 96% of our economy here are driven by SMEs, right? So we will need to close that financing gap if we want to really drive that economy, and if we want to do it in an inclusive way and in a gender inclusive way, it needs to be gender responsive in its approach as well. And I'm actually I also quite like that you're saying, well, it's market ruled, and it's the women-owned businesses that gain access to finance are getting this because they are part of a market system. And I'm really pleased that we have a true founder with us today, a woman entrepreneur who probably can speak about her own experience when it comes accessing finance, how to get investors into your company, or deliberately not getting investors into your company. These are choices as well. But I think what I really would like to get our next speaker, who is Ganak Hirani, who's the founder of a really exciting fashion enterprise, to talk about, is exactly what Keiko actually mentioned, is sort of these are women-owned enterprises, or enterprises with a purpose themselves. They're part of the economy. And if you will listen to Ganak's story on how she has kind of built her enterprise and what role how she looks at gender-responsive procurement from her own business perspective, I think you will see what opportunity there is in getting more women-owned enterprises in this middle piece of the pyramid. Ganak, over to you. Share us a little bit about your exciting venture and what you have been doing to empower women there.
Thanks for having me here today, Katya, and for the wonderful, warm introduction. I'm the founder of Julahas, an Amsterdam-based ethical fashion brand that works with rural artisans, who are mostly women, to create fashion with impact. When I founded Julahas, it was on the belief that there are women just like me who make daily choices on what to wear. And while they want to look good, they also want to make a positive difference to both people and the planet. What I found is that apart from the unique design of the products that Julahas offers, one of the reasons why people choose to purchase with my brand is because they know that I work with women artisans, and indirectly through their purchase, they're contributing to livelihoods. So I make a very conscious choice to communicate that I work with women. I am a woman-owned founder. I mean, it is a woman-owned brand. And that through every purchase, there is an impact that's being made. But as a young direct-to-consumer brand, my challenge is twofold. One is to connect directly to my customer, who's a conscious consumer, and to offer them products that have style, but also a story. And the second challenge is to connect with larger companies that could potentially be my buyers in the future and help me scale my business. And since I'm based in Europe and I work remotely with rural artisans, it also means that I need to find the right partners to work with. And these are partners that have to share similar values to mine. Again, I've chosen consciously to work with groups that have a very high representation of women, or organizations that are women-led. And I've chosen to do that because I believe that when you invest in a woman, you invest in a community. And that has been one of the founding principles of my brand, is to create something that sustains lives. When it comes to connecting with larger companies, making inroads can be quite difficult. Big brands are typically looking at larger quantities and lower pricing. And often these are two things that young, sustainable businesses aren't able to negotiate on because for example, my business model, which is of slow fashion, is very different from a traditional model of fast fashion and large quantities. So there has to be that mindset shift for larger companies to start to think sustainably, and also realize that young brands are sort of changing the way or paving the way for these new emerging consumption patterns and new ways of doing business. So I hope that kind of shares some of my story and throws some light into both challenges and opportunities that as a female-led business we face.
Thank you very much, Kanak. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. So I had the privilege to work partially with Kanak in one of our programs that we have started last year during the pandemic, which we call the Industry Disruptor Program, which is a program in the fashion industry that actually really looked at sustainability changes across the value chain from production countries in India to consumption at other parts of the world. And so what the platform actually did is really bringing inspiring entrepreneurs like Ganak and others together, women-owned businesses at a majority, with larger corporates like H&M, Chibo, Bonprix, to really work together on identifying some innovation to address some of the largest sustainability challenges in these value chains, but also use this as a platform to connect between different players. And Kanak, it would be really great if you just kind of share a little bit also your experience on how to connect with larger corporates, what kind of other hurdles to do this, and connections to like-minded entrepreneurs. How important is that for enterprises like yours?
Yes, Katya. I have to say that for me, the Industry Disruptor Program came at a time when, the whole world was seeing so many changes because of COVID. Lives were impacted. Consumers were making, they were thinking twice before making hasty purchases. And even businesses that were used to traditional ways of selling, they could no longer sell face to face. So I realize that as entrepreneurs, we're so busy growing our business that we don't really spend time investing in ourselves. So for me, the industry disruptor was the perfect moment to kind of take a pause and to, use this learning opportunity to plan for the future and connect with a peer group of like-minded change makers. What I found very interesting is that traditionally boot camps and such programs don't offer you opportunities to connect with larger brands. But there we were, talking to heads at H&M, at Chibo, and that's when I realized that these larger brands, they do have sustainability high on their agenda, and they are also very open to hearing the experiences of other younger startups in terms of how do you deal with challenges such as overproduction, excess inventory. How have we kind of either prevented that from happening already in the early stages of our business? And also how they are looking now at incorporating more sustainable products into their product offerings. So it was, for me, a very exciting opportunity to connect with them, to introduce my brand. And I hope that someday in the future it could mean that you see Julahas at a corner in Chibo, and that would really make me proud that it's possible uh, to give my small brand a global name. Apart from that, the connections with larger companies, I think it's also important to connect with peers. And that connection of entrepreneurs through the Industry Disruptor Program also helped me launch 3 new products during COVID, which is pretty amazing because right from idea to market, I was actually able to create 3 new innovative products by through the connections from the women, the other entrepreneurs in my group. All I had to do is put out a message, and I had like these whole bunch of replies that yes, I can put you in touch with someone. I know someone who's working with cotton, someone who has a loom, somebody who's working with cork, and all of them are women-run businesses. So for me, this group has kind of become my go-to for honest advice, or if I need to make a new business connection, or if I need to know, okay, where do I set up a bank account? They're there for me. So it's been a fantastic experience, Katya.
Great. Thank you so much, Kanak, for sharing this, and I want to take this also as a reminder for everyone who is with us today. We still have our word cloud open, and we were looking for what needs to be done to get this shift from 1% procurement spend to a higher procurement spend. And we've heard from Ganak, who was talking about networks are important. We have heard about from Gecko, which has triggered already some follow-up questions, which I see in our Q&As here around really on how to closing the finance gap. So please keep adding into the Q&As, but also keep adding to the word cloud and share with us what you think are the key steps that need to be taken to move that needle here. So we've heard also from Ganak about her challenges, but in the end also the opportunities of connecting to larger corporates. And that's actually a nice segue into our next speaker, Nusrat Enke, who's joining us from Unilever. And I'm actually also very pleased, Nusrat, that you join us as the procurement director for Southeast Asia, because we've recently started doing some assessments and some landscaping and research. And it's not so difficult to find actually really female procurement directors. So there is a lot to be said also that a gender balance in procurement departments is probably a first step to really create a more gender responsive policies and supplier diversity at large. But Nusra, we know also from you coming from Unilever, which is, I think, in the space of business and human rights, and probably amongst the attendees of these forums, very well known as a pioneer of sustainability in business. And last year your sustainability living plan came to an end after 10 years, but it didn't came to the end in reality. And I think it was really exciting to see that Unilever has just recently put some new commitments out, which also include gender responsive procurement or supplier diversity in a larger sense. And it would be great, Nusra, if you could just kind of share a little bit with us first what these commitments entail. And we're going to be putting some slides up for you as well to just kind of talk us through this a little bit. And then we're going to go more into the practicalities afterwards. Tell us a bit about that new exciting commitment.
Sure. Okay, so firstly, very happy to meet you guys virtually on one of my most passionate topics. Thank you for having me here. At Unilever, we have our own global social commitment aiming at a more inclusive society already. And gender responsive procurement is part of the key pillar towards that. We have launched a wide-ranging set of the commitments and actions to raise the living standards across our value chain. Suppliers is included. In order to create the opportunities through inclusivity and also to prepare people for the future of work. So let me give you the brief outline of our global social commitment on what we have been done and also what we advocate for. There are 4 key pillars: rights, skills, opportunities, and also driving change within the society at large. For rights, we are driving for equal rights and safety. We believe that these are the building blocks for the inclusive development. At Unilever, we aim to advance human rights in our own operations and also extended value chains. And also to stop this challenge harmful gender norms. Also, we advocate for increase in investment to tackle any gender-based violence by addressing some of the systematic issues, such as harmful norms or stereotypes. We are looking for the right partners to scale implementation of the global safety framework for women in rural space that developed with the UN Women as well. Secondly, skills, as mentioned of some of the panelists earlier already. We provide women across the value chains, either employees, farmers, retailers, entrepreneurs, and consumers. The access to trainings, and access to financial and digital access to succeed in this workforce. We also advocate for the partners to increase the investment in training, education, and reskilling for those most excluded from the labor markets, especially women, girls, and the young people. Thirdly, opportunities. We in Unilever, we invest a lot in business opportunities for women, which gender responsive procurement is part of that. And not only in the suppliers, but across the supply chain, distribution networks, and also in the markets. Last but not least, driving change within the society at large. This is mostly through our brands. So we create the positive beauty with the ambition to do better for people and the planets. Our brand is aiming at to end discrimination in beauty and champion at inclusion, driving gender equity, including through stepping up the brand's program, advocating for unstereotyping advertising. This is all what we are doing in the Unilever Global Social Commitment. And if I can step deeper into the promote supplier diversity, which is part of the key pillar, the new innovative of the global social commitment. We commit globally to spend more than 2 billion euros annually with diverse supplier by the year 2025. What do we mean by diverse suppliers? These suppliers will be small or medium suppliers owned and managed by either women, underrepresented racial or ethnic groups, people with disabilities, and LGBTQI+ groups. We advocate for public and private investors to redirect additional funds towards more diverse suppliers. There are different focus in each countries, of course. In Australia, we are focusing on indigenous or Aboriginal-owned suppliers. In Thailand, the primary focus will be on women-owned suppliers as part of the gender responsive procurement. We commit to not only to spend more with this group of suppliers, but also to development further with future fit skills. Though the limitation for the time being is we do not have any established database about women-owned suppliers, to whom could we engage with? This is what we are working so hard in order to start this program with. Last but not least, we strongly believe that by promoting supplier diversity as a means to raise living standard across the value chain, this will create opportunities through inclusivity and prepare people for future work. This is what I have today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nusra, for sharing this. And I think it's also bringing a new dimension which we haven't discussed yet, and I think it's as well intersectionality, but also expanding and not only looking at gender responsive procurement, but to start somewhere. I think a focus on gender is very important, because that is the largest group that currently is not participating. But it's really important to see other groups coming in. Your definition of how to create supplier diversity, including young people, people with disabilities, etc. So that's a really great way, and I think that's also from a UN Women perspective, and I think everyone here on the line agrees to that. We have seen that in other parts of the world, this becomes part of the definition already. So I think great to see that progressive and forward-looking definitions here also from Unilever. I do have a bit of a follow-up question, and I see Nusra, there are also some questions in the chat already for you, which I'll gonna take in a second. But this is obviously a global commitment, and you have shared a little bit on how that's translating into the different countries. But knowing that you are based here in Thailand, maybe just a perspective from yourself in terms of really localizing such a big commitment into a context of Thailand. What kind of challenges do you see, or what does come with that? I mean, you're the procurement director here, so you probably get, so Nusra, now we need to figure this out here in Thailand for Unilever. So how do you go about this, and what kind of barriers do you face?
I think surprisingly, as I mentioned earlier, is to start with, whom should we engage with? We have no such a database or who are the women-owned or women-led suppliers. There's no such public database. So we are willing to develop them further, to spend more with them, but there's no such a database. So hence, in order to develop such a database, it's already such a big job to start with. That's one of the very surprise that I'm dealing with for the time being. So in order to put the milestone over there, that's one of the key elements. The further is to put the concrete step on how to develop further, how to spend more with them. But in order to put the detailed program down, we need to understand first what is the playground.
Thanks for sharing this, and I think we have heard this from previous speakers as well. I think Ibu Anita shared as well, sort of the data, the importance of data in a country is very important to really take these steps. So that's obviously something which cannot be done alone by an organization like Unilever, and really calls for partnerships and collaboration with governments together. We've heard from the ministries of SME development. I think Ivo Anita mentioned that well, the collaboration there. So that is something, I think, a big opportunity to really advance the agenda. But I want to also kind of close the loop with Minnie, who has kicked us off today before we come to Q&As, and then listening to what the audience also has to say. Unfortunately, what we see in the region to date is commitments like the ones Unilever has made are still scarce. So we have done, UN Women has a community of corporates that we are working with through a platform which is called the Women's Empowerment Principles, where companies also do gender assessments and really look across their value chain on where do they have gaps and where do they have opportunities to really fill them. And one of the things, not surprisingly, is from that database we know that less than 6% of the corporates of that group is not statistically representative of a full market, but it gives us already an idea, even in a group of companies who have gender as a priority and have made gender commitments, only 6% do have gender responsive procurement policies in place. So Minnie, I know you have been working with a large number of corporates globally. So what needs to be done to engage more corporates on how can we kind of create more Unilever like-minded organizations? How could they work together? What's your experience that you have seen in the region?
Sure. Yep. So Katya, I think for me as a start, it is understanding, like for a lot of the corporations in this region, it is understanding what it means to source from women-owned businesses. It's also about, how to set those targets, how to set the baseline, understand where they are in buying from women-owned businesses, and then, set the baseline, then set a target and how to work towards achieving that. So I think that is the basic sort of like knowledge sharing training that a lot of buyers in this region need to set that like baseline to begin with. The next step is, it's one thing to commit to buying from women-owned businesses, but then it's about actually measuring how much you're buying from women-owned businesses and being accountable for that. So when you set a target, very, very few companies will be set it publicly. So that is where the next challenge comes. So one of the things that We Connect International did for International Women's Day is something called Rise to the Challenge, which is that we worked with our corporate members to actually set public targets that they would work and that we would hold them accountable to. So for example, Moody's Corporation has committed to spending 5% of their procurement spend this year just in 2021 with women-owned businesses. Logitech is committed to doing increasing it 10% year on year with women-owned businesses. Intel has committed to achieving a 500 million annual spend with women-owned businesses by 2025, and Unilever is the other one. So we're very proud to be working with them. And Nusra, I mean, I was dying to speak a new word, but we do have a global database of women-owned businesses that Unilever has access to, and that's one way that we're trying to help women, all of these organizations achieve those goals, because we just heard from Nusra is what the most common plaintiff that we hear, which is we don't know where to start to find women-owned businesses. We don't know how to identify those women-owned businesses. We don't know how to verify that they are indeed women-owned. We don't know how to assess that they are the right businesses for our procurement needs. That's where organizations like us, but also others like ADB, the government, etc., in various countries are trying to help to move that needle, to enable this to become an easier process. And I think that the fear of that process is something that is holding back a lot of corporations, especially in Asia Pacific, which is why we're trying to encourage more public conversations about this to get people who are actually ahead of the curve, who can speak to how they have been setting up their supplier diversity programs, the benefits of buying from women-owned businesses. And this includes not just the corporates, but also organizations like the UN and the World Bank to talk about the benefits that they see in buying from women-owned businesses.
Great. Thank you very much, Minnie. There are a couple of questions that come in already from the audience, and we are coming to the part where we really want to get more of these tabled. But before we do this, I would just kind of ask, how are we doing on our word cloud? Any ideas on how to shift the needle on the 1% procurement spend to, I don't know, Minnie, if there's a target to be set here, but it should be definitely a double-digit one very soon in our region. I do like the...
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to get to 2% is 10 billion more in the hands of. So imagine if we get to double digits, how much more that we investing in doing business.
Thank you. I mean, your line was a bit cutting out, but or maybe that was my line. But I think what we've heard, multiple people must have said conversations seems to be a big one on this. And I think conversations also linking to partnerships. We do see legislation. We see the reflection of gender lens investing. So the finance element, which Kiko brought up before, and awareness. I do think this is a very important one as well, to really raise awareness about that. And that brings me to really kind of looking at some of the questions here in our document. So Nusra, you're going to be put on the spot. There are quite a couple of questions. I think people are inspired by what Unilever is doing. So one is on how is Unilever tracking progress towards their goal. So did you do or did you undertake an analysis to access your current stand and how you basically follow up on this? Maybe we'll start there with you, Nusra, if you have any thoughts on that globally or for Thailand. I think that or the region, either way is fine.
So for Thailand, for the time being, we do our own manual trackers by Excel, and you can imagine that we have more than 10,000 suppliers. Yeah, and you can imagine how the workload additionally we have to do. So that's why we are thinking about it, if there is any such established database that we can do, and this is only with the current suppliers that we have already. The difficulty is that what if we want to work further with the new suppliers, women-owned suppliers that we don't have any access with? We are blind. Yeah, and that's why, Minnie, I'm happy to hear you that you have the global database, and then if you have it for Thailand, for Thai suppliers, then we could engage further with the new suppliers, with women-owned suppliers based in Thailand, so that we can engage further. So back to your question, Katya, for the time being, it's only the manual trackers, and then we are willing to work, co-work with any partners to help to make it better in terms of any trackers, helping to ensure that this work better.
Thank you very much, Nusra, on this. Staying in the space of databases and the importance of data, and anyone can answer, but I'm thinking maybe Kiko or Minnie, or maybe even Ibu Anita, you have ideas on this. Are there any examples of countries where we have seen that there are gender disaggregated databases of SMEs, for example, are established, and how did this help to advance procurement spend for women-owned businesses? I think the million-dollar question, probably. Don't know, Ibu, Anita, anything to share from Indonesia on how you have been kind of working with the Ministry of SME Development in setting up such databases? Anything you would like to share on that?
Yeah, one of our plan to increase women-owned business to join or to participate in government procurement are we want to identify the women-owned business in our application. There are two at least application on e-procurement and also in vendor directory, and we have to collaborate with Ministry of SME about this. And Katya, I want to inform you that actually in Indonesia now, there's a draft of presidential decree of national entrepreneurship development. It is proposed from the Ministry of SMA also. And one of the thematic category of the presidential decree is women entrepreneurs. And in this draft, women entrepreneurs define the definition about women entrepreneurs. It is owning a business with this business capital ownership of at least 51% of the business. The National Entrepreneurship Development Coordination Committee can issue appropriate regulation to further regulate the category of the women entrepreneurs, including NPPA in government procurement. So it is, I think, the one of a great opportunity for the Indonesia government procurement to maybe initiate the specific rule about the women on business to participate in government procurement. I think it's Katya. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Anita. Anyone else who wants to contribute to get that question? Another question.
Quickly step in.
Yeah, go please.
Yeah, I think
Please,
the answer is basically there are no countries, and but going back to that question of definition. So from listening to Ibu Anita, basically the fact that they adopted a definition last year has this trickle-down effect that can then affect policies on the public sector side and hopefully influence also then private sector. What are the incentives that the public sector can create then for private sector procurement targets? So I think that's really important to be able to identify and define. ADB is working also in the Philippines in a similar way, and also with WeConnect on these type of issues. So it's a long process, but it's some of these kind of building blocks are key to be able to have a clear definition. And when I've had conversations with the Ministry of SME in Indonesia, we've also talked about labels, such as the one that Minnie mentioned at the beginning. And so there's great interest, but if you don't know how many there are, where they are, there's a huge issue about databases, who are these women that we keep on talking about, and are they viable businesses? So sometimes people will respond, oh, but they're very small. So are they big enough? So there's a lot of kind of steps that have to be taken to be able to create like that appropriate policy for each context. Well, actually, I might take this opportunity, this pause, to talk about some of the work that Katja and I are doing together on gender responsive procurement in the Asia Pacific region, which includes a report which basically benchmarks where countries are in terms of gender responsive procurement, both in the public and private sector. And this report has already benefited from some insights from Indonesia, from Unilever and others. And the idea is to basically set that kind of knowledge baseline so that different development partners, whether that's Asian Development Bank, UN Women, private sector, or others, governments can kind of think about where are the entry points, what makes for good practice. I saw one of those questions also come up. So, you know, what does a good policy for procurement look like? I don't know if I could really tell you. So I think that there's a lot to kind of to learn still, and because we don't have many policies yet in the Asia Pacific, there's a steep learning curve. Other countries seem to be other regions such as Africa, as I understand, are much more advanced in these type of questions already, and in Latin America. So I think there may be also a lot of learning to do from other regions. Katja, you're back.
Thank you. I see you have probably enlightened the audience on definitions and good practices in the region. Thank you very much, Gecko. So is the key message out of your long discourse? Probably we will need to align on definitions, and definitions is a good, probably opened the session very wrongly in saying it's boring, but it's a key building block on really triggering down change.
I think there's a lot of knowledge gaps, which I was just mentioning, Katja, the UN Women ADB report on gender responsive procurement that hopes to contribute to reducing that knowledge gap a little bit and help kind of both public and the private sector to look more into what they can do on gender responsive procurement.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And stay tuned, that's going to be coming out soon this year. Okay, we are getting closer to the end of the session, which I find always inspiring to hear from everyone and so many different perspectives. Kanak, I do have a question for you from the audience. So when we think about gender responsive procurement, we also have to think about the supply side, and women-owned enterprises already face a number of barriers to growth. And the person wants to know, how can we help more women entrepreneurs to build their skills, access to finance, and really help them to be competitive in a very competitive business world? Any kind of guidance or?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think one of the biggest challenges women tend to face typically is that they undersell themselves. And you know, it's we don't really talk about all that good work that we're doing, and I believe that it's in some ways it's women who can help become role models for other women in their communities. And by working with women artisans myself, I have seen how when you train or you show that one woman is able to start to earn a steady livelihood, she can then put that money back into the son's education or her daughter's education. She can afford to live in a rented room close to a weaving unit. there are other women in the community who look at her and say, wow, that is impressive, you know. So I think we as women can be role models for other women. So it is a combination of access to markets. It's a combination of access to training or training opportunities. It's about you know, using your peers to engage with, to learn from, but also for getting honest inputs from them. So I myself have found that, you know, in the last year, I have learned so much through the Industry Disruptor program as well, in terms of, okay, how do you position yourself as a woman-owned business? How do you communicate that? How do you then, you know, contribute to creating skills development programs for the women that you work with? So all of that, I think, it's not just one aspect, but you have to look at it holistically.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kanak, for this. And we are in the last 5 minutes of the session, and I'm going to put you all on a last closing comment. And we have heard from Keko, I think I called this down, gender responsive procurement, or procurement means access to markets. And I would love to hear from each of you, putting yourself in the shoes of the audience. You're going to have this word cloud, and I'm going to say not longer than 2 words on this word cloud. What is it what organizations like yours can do to really help to shift that needle on getting more women-owned businesses connected to the markets through more gender-responsive procurement schemes? And I'm gonna start as you are on my screen here. So Ibu, Anita, I'm gonna start with you. What can governments do to really shift that needle? 2 words or 1 sentence?
Thank you, Katja. And PPA will support our programs to support women-owned business in the Indonesia, government procurement, and ready to doing affirmative action to women empowerment like capacity building and enhance accessibility.
Great, that was sharp. Thank you very much, Ibu, Anita. Keiko.
It's a really tough question, Katja. So I'll say, even though this may seem simplistic, I'll say targets. So for a development partner like the Asian Development Bank is to set targets for our clients, our other development partners and governments to prioritize women-owned business in order to even out a very uneven market. Thank you.
Thank you, Keiko. Kanak, tough one.
Yeah, look for more women-owned businesses. Look for organizations that that work with women. So even if they're not women-owned, I think it's great to look for companies or businesses that have a higher representation of women, or at least women in the top management or in decision-making places, or even as, like, I work with artisan groups. It may not be owned by women. As long as there's a very high representation of women, I know that they have their heart in the right place.
I like that very much. Thank you, Kanak. Nusra.
Gender responsive procurement is already part of global Unilever commitment. But though we will also advocate more to get more members, more people to join our commitment so that we can make bigger impact to the society together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nusra. Minnie, you have the last word.
I guess for me, it would be a lot of the global MNCs have started making that commitment to buying from women-owned businesses. But I would encourage both local representatives of those organizations in Asia Pacific, as well as local companies in Asia Pacific, to make that commitment and to really look at your supply chain and how much you're buying from women-owned businesses, because as you know, women thrive, economies thrive. And so let's help Asia Pacific, you know, recover from the pandemic by leveraging the power of women-owned businesses.
Thank you, so much, and I was just noting down everything, and I said, I thought myself, I was just going to wrap it up and quote all of you, but you have just put it so beautifully that I don't actually have to do this. And I really just want to close that session with one word from my side, which is two words, gratitude and really partnerships. I'm really grateful for the partnerships that we have, not only with your organizations and you amongst each others or with others, but I think that is also the spirit. We should take this very important issue further in our region as women leaders in the Asia Pacific. So I hope we're going to have next year another iteration of gender responsive procurement, and maybe our 1%, 2% is going to be growing in our region, and we're going to be tracking this. So thank you very much, everyone, for your very valuable contribution, and also thank you very much for the people watching us and really hopefully joining us on this movement on gender responsive procurement. Thank you very much, everyone.